You're listening to Funk with Fate, a show about being a body and cultivating pleasurable relationships with everything. And I'm your host, Mackenzie McCormick. This podcast will explore how our embodied experiences connect us to the world through astrology, philosophy, dance, magic, and anything that invigorates our aliveness. What makes us feel the most alive? Big inhale, big exhale. Now let's get grooving. Hello, Hottie, and welcome to the show. Right now it is 1:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. And at this moment, Cancer is rising on this super gorgeous full moon in Libra day. Today, we are exploring ballet and astrology, this combination of two things that I love dearly and that this person that I have with me also loves dearly. Today, we have Jo on the show with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I have been so excited to talk about like the two loves of my life and the crossover of my dreams.
I'm so excited about this, and I'm so excited that you are here with me to talk about this, because I deeply respect your perspective and your experience in this, and I'm so excited to talk about this. So I guess let's let everybody on the show know who you are, where you come from, what your practice is like, anything that you wish to share with us.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I'm Jo O'Neill. I'm from Oklahoma City. I was born and raised here, and I'm an astrologer who does consultations in a professional capacity. Been doing that since 2018, and then some before in a more casual capacity for friends and family and things. And I'm also a writer. Let's see. What else about me? I guess we should talk about my ballet background. Is it too soon to do that?
Never too soon.
Okay, so my first job ever was a professional ballet dancer. I danced with the Oklahoma City Ballet for a couple of years. But ballet started for me when I was 5 with just, pre-ballet classes. It wasn't super intense training when I was that young, but my pre-professional training started probably when I was 11 or 12. That's when I started going away every summer for training intensives. And I have this vivid memory of people being like, "Oh, how was camp?" when I would get back. And I was like, my dude, it was not summer camp. Like, these were such intense trainings, and it just was really a way of life for me. It's like all I did growing up. And then when I was 17, that's when I joined the Oklahoma City Ballet, and I danced there for 2 seasons. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with my background. Ballet was really my whole life before astrology became my whole life in my 20s. So
Definitely. I love talking to you about it because you have such a rich perspective on it that comes so well informed. Like, it's very easy in the dance world to talk to somebody about something and you're like, do you get it? Do you actually get it? And then it's like that recognition and knowingness of, oh, you get it. You get it. So starting off the top, I would assume a lot of people watching this episode probably know what ballet is. But for those who don't know what ballet is, it's kind of wild. So essentially the king of France, decided that they really love this up on your toes look, which is so wild in perspective to think that there was one like wild decision that was aesthetically made by someone that was like, and we are now shifting the culture for the rest of perpetuity.
Yeah. King Louis XIV got super into ballet. And he like fashioned himself as the sun god, as like literal Apollo in like a 12-hour like it was real king shit, but like not in like the best way, but very Leo energy. But yeah, I don't know if this story is true, but my dance teachers used to tell me that King Louis XIV loved his calves so much that that's why ballet dancers turn out their legs. I really think it was more for like more availability to move diagonally and sideways to do fancy court dances. But I like the King Louis XIV myth about his calves because it feels like a King Louis XIV thing to do for sure.
Also, ballet dancers have wicked calves. So it would totally
100%.
track. It would totally track that if he was into it, he'd be like, you know what?
this part of my body that was lackluster before, it is now the best thing about me aesthetically. I would like to show it off.
Yep.
Respect.
And he's like, yeah, we all do this now. This is just what ballet is now.
Quite literally, it was like, and we have set the stage for everyone else. And it really transitioned a lot from just being this like court thing that was done for essentially like the higher ups of the world, you know, if you had money, if you had rank, if you had title, then you were able to go see ballets and you were able to go like enjoy the art, until it really started trickling down over the years and everybody was sort of seeing it, getting into it, although it still remained in many ways something that had a bit of a barrier to entry because of how much training and technique it did require to even do or perform it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that does take so much time and energy, that, you know, it makes a lot of sense that there would be barrier to entry, not only just due to like cost and things, but just due to not everyone's interested in dedicating like all their spare time into honing a craft that does basically really unnatural things to your skeleton in the name of like aesthetics.
In the name of beauty.
Yes, in the name of beauty. Yes.
Art.
Yeah.
And so I guess a lot of people in pop culture have probably heard of some of the biggest ballets. For sure, the Nutcracker around Christmas is like the classic. People growing up that I had that were not into ballet, not into dance at all, their family had like a tradition of going to see the Nutcracker every year. Like it was just a thing that people do.
Totally. And even like on radio stations, I feel like I'm showing my age because I don't even know if people listen to the radio anymore, but like so many songs from the Nutcracker are songs people recognize because they're used in like Christmas season commercials and like holiday season things around December, just everywhere. The fucking Sugar Plum Fairy theme is something everybody knows, even if they don't know it by that name, because it's in like every jewelry store commercial ever.
Which is why holidays. It is wild to think about how much the Nutcracker has permeated the holiday season as it being a like foundational part of the holidays, not just for the ballet or the performance or the aesthetic or any of it. Like this is embedded in our holiday spirit because it's a ballet that takes place around Christmas. So
totally.
And then there's others like the Black Swan movie, which anyone who has any experience in ballet has like hot take opinions about Black Swan.
Yeah, I sure do. I've only seen it once and it was a long time ago, but there were like moments where I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. And then moments where I was like, okay, this is accurate.
Both.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Both sides for sure. Yes, I think we do need to talk about ballet core as an aesthetic that has taken over the TikTok girlies in the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about ballet core. Do you want to start or would you like me to start?
You go ahead and I'll bounce off.
Okay, time to pop off. So first and foremost, I think ballet core is fine. Like people clearly really enjoy it. And I love that for them, like really honestly and truly. But the thing as like an ex-ballet dancer myself that drives me so nuts about ballet core is that it's like all the aesthetic things about ballet that I did not like in an aesthetic, like baby pink and like the scrunchy like leg warmers and like the little like very femme skirts and things.
And I hated top.
Not the wrap sweater.
The wrap sweater.
The wrap sweater. Yeah, it's giving my ballet teacher as a child who literally used to be like in Miss America pageants. And it's just not for me. It's not for me. And like, I think about like, if I were to import my own experience with ballet into some sort of ballet core, that like fit my style when I was dancing, it would essentially be similar to what I wear now, because it would be all black. Like I always wore black tights over my leotard. I frequently wore black leotards, trash bag shorts. Anyone who has danced for any amount of time probably knows what I mean by trash bag shorts.
Let's give a moment for the trash bag shorts. Honestly, they have been doing God's work for a very long time.
Oh, 100%. There were also trash bag pants, trash bag like unitards with the little spaghetti straps. And if you were cool, you would like roll the like camisole part down over your hips. Oh my goodness. So, yeah, I mean, overall, any aesthetic, do whatever you want. But I just think ballet core is so funny because I was like, never the wrap skirt, wrap sweater, pink tights girly in ballet class at all. So far from the truth. So those are my thoughts there.
I agree with everything you said, 100%. I'm gonna plug my little optimist point to it, which is that I do enjoy that Ballet Corps has encouraged more adults to get into ballet as adults. That is the one thing that I do like about it, because it's like, you know what? If that cute little wrap sweater is what is getting your ass to class because you need to work on your posture, perfect.
100%.
I live for it. I live for it. It's just knowing that like us with training are not super responsive to the aesthetic, because the aesthetic doesn't quite align with the way we feel about it. But I do think that especially adults getting into ballet more because of it is really healthy, because there are so many people with posture problems and like shoulders, neck, chest, back, all of those things that could really benefit from strengthening and working on that, which I do like the ballet core girlies that are like, oh my gosh, I love this look, I'm going to go to class now. We love that. We love it. We love an aesthetic that goes to class.
That is like the quote of the day. We love an aesthetic that goes to class. Oh my goodness. This is only slightly related and I just thought of it, but I'm thinking too about how a lot of dancers, you know, myself included, a lot of the stylistic choices are also based on like superstition items, like your lucky warm-up sweater, or like the wrap you got from like your teacher that she like gave to you and it was a big deal and you wear it before every show. And I'm just thinking about how like superstition like intersects with magic and in those ways. And I just feel like that's relevant to the other parts of life that we're involved with as astrologers and like occultists and magicians. So like actual ballet style is also super personal in that way too. A lot of people don't necessarily wear what they're wearing for style reasons. They wear it, number one, to warm up their joints and muscles. And then like number two, for like really personal nostalgia or superstition reasons. And I just think that's really, really cool. If I had like unlimited resources, I would like try to go interview professional dancers of all different kinds on their like pre-show rituals and like why certain items mean a lot to them. And like, ooh, it would be so cool. But just slightly tangential ballet and style overlap comment, I guess.
The pre-show ritual is a thing.
Yes.
And
yes.
I remember my days. I guess I should probably share my ballet background. Rip.
Yes.
But I actually did not start with ballet. So I started with hip hop because I was a kid that loved dancing and saw MTV music videos and was like, that's the coolest shit that I've ever seen. I would like to throw my ass like that. Super pure thoughts for a child, right? That wasn't, that wasn't verbatim, but still, I was like, they're moving so much, because that was really what struck me, was how much they were moving. And then I did a couple of years of hip hop, and then eventually anybody who has danced in a studio understands this moment when the kid who is really good at hip hop or Latin or funk or whatever, you're like, so are you gonna take ballet? Are you gonna do some technique? And thankfully I really wanted to compete. And so I was super down, and I did not have like a super joyful time with ballet. I would say I struggled a lot, especially because I started ballet when I was a little, it's funny to say older now because I was like 10 years old. But in the ballet
Which is
world,
older for ballet, and that's wild.
Like if you don't start ballet when you're like literally 4 or 5, it's like you're a late bloomer.
100%.
And so that was like the kind of rhetoric that I felt a lot in my studio. And so it took literally adulthood for me to fall in love with ballet, until I was done competing, until I was out of the actual time when it could really probably do something for me, at least competition wise, for my studio to get trophies and stuff, that I actually fell in love with ballet and the technique and the history and just how much is there for you to really grow and expand on beyond just like taking one step and then progressions and then taking it further. And I just fell in love with it. And so at this point, I'm now the dance studio's ballet teacher where I teach at. This is just a time to shout out Joe dealing with my voice memos when I talk about my ballet classes, because Joe gets them. When I'm like, oh my God, ballet class, this thing happened. I have to tell Joe now.
I live for it.
Because that's how it is when it's a very specific niche that you really have to understand and get it. And that has really, Joe's helped me a lot the last few months, everybody. Everyone should know that I am a more sane person today because of Joe's help. Because my ballet classes have been changing a lot recently, especially probably worth mentioning is that my story is maybe a little more typical than Joe's. It's more common that kids are like into one of the fun styles, and then you have to kind of show them ballet is important. It's not as often you have a kid that's like, I love ballet. That is not as common. That's not as common. We wish it was. But thankfully there are more of that. And I think as there are more like fun ballet teachers, that helps, as maybe not as many super strict Russian ballet teachers. I guess that's also worth mentioning is that even though it was a French creation per se, people often associate ballet as being Russian because so many ballets and composers and professional ballerinas have come out of Russia, and it has been a much more, I guess, public or loud way of like proclaiming their dominance in something. And so many people often don't realize that it was from the French that it even came to be in the first place, which makes sense when you think about it because all of the words are in French, you know, tendu, plie, they're all French words, but it's still a Russian almost invention people think of.
100%. Russia got a hold of ballet and they were like, we love this shit 1000%. And yeah, it really took off in the French courts, but so my pre-professional teacher was Italian, and she always emphasized, she was like, ballet actually originated in the Italian courts, but it like moved to the French courts so quickly that like there's so much French influence, and like French ballet is what a lot of us really, really know. And then for the big nerds out there, you may recognize the name Vaganova. Agrippina Vaganova was Russian and like became an icon with like this whole full-fledged technique that was very, very Russian in style. So Russia and ballet, 100%. It's like the two just go together aside from like ballet and French. That's probably the biggest thing people think of.
100%. So let's dive in to the planets. Let's go there. Let's go.
I'm excited.
Let's go ahead. I'll pop up your chart right now and show it. To give some, if you consent to me doing that right now.
100%. Let's see why Joe was the child that was like, I love this extremely strict environment. I love this oppressive technique.
It is.
That's
all
why.
So this is Joe's chart. If you are listening, Joe is a Leo sun and a rising with that gorgeous Cancer moon. And Venus in Virgo, Saturn in Aquarius. Massive. We love the Virgo power of Joe.
Yeah, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all in Virgo.
Like, why did Joe like it so much? Oh,
because Joe loves precision. Joe loves technique and craft. Joe likes it when things are really difficult.
That is very true about not just Mercury, but like Virgo specifically is the love of a clean line. Like, oh yeah, very clean, very precise. It's very much there. So that's Joe's chart. And so when we talk about ballet, it's kind of obvious to start with Venus because Venus, in a way, rules all dance because it is this beautiful, entertaining, pleasurable, joyful thing that is very beautiful to watch. Like you watch a ballet. I don't think anyone has ever been to a ballet and not just been absolutely breathtaken by some of the things that you see, some of the physical acts that just seem impossible. And you're just like, I have been absolutely awed by what I just saw and the performance that I just saw. And in so many ways, that is the beauty of Venus.
Absolutely. It's such a detailed and kind of opulent art form on the surface too, with I know you mentioned in our outline these like incredible costumes, just so much detail, even with the sets. And a lot of ballet was actually linked to opera as well. And sometimes that's almost, it's not more obvious, but it's another art form and performing art that just screams Venus. Like it's not only dance and acting, but it's also like singing in its own incredibly technique-based kind of way. So yeah, Venus for sure has a lot to do with ballet. Um, and I think about Venus as well with how, as just like aesthetics in general, and how specific the ballet aesthetic is and how focused on aesthetic ballet is. Um, you know, in the very beginning of ballet, point shoes, so the shoes that allow you to stand on your toes, were not a thing yet. We saw a lot of the little kind of fancy court shoes with heels. Like if you think about like King Louis XIV and his little high heels, like that was a lot of what we had. Um, but then as ballet progressed and technique progressed and got more complex, a lot of the ballets that were being made were about ethereal creatures, and they really wanted the ballerinas to look otherworldly. And actually, at some point, I don't know the dates for this, but at some point they would put the ballerinas on wires so they could float around the stage. And then eventually, early prototype point shoes were made to make the ballerinas appear even more weightless. We see this in ballets like La Sylphide, where it's literally about a sylph that's like this ethereal being that's like half in the other world. So there's so much dedication to the perception that the audience gets, that with so much work behind the scenes, which I know we're going to get to in a minute, but there's so much dedication to the Venusian in ballet. It's just awe-inspiring.
And even to talk about point shoes a bit, because there's I think actually this has been one of the funniest things that I've seen about like the TikTok ballet core girlies is like the girls that be like slamming their point shoes on the ground, and people in the comments are like, why don't they just sell them customized? And it's like, you have no idea. They are selling the customized ones like that. That is what they're selling.
Yes.
And then you still have to rip them down, break them apart, re-sew them, reattach them, do all of the things to make it fit your foot, because in the way that like no body is the same, no foot is going to fit the same in the same shoe. Even if you can say, oh, well, my foot is kind of shaped the same way as this person, you're probably going to use very different styles of point shoes, and all of the customization that goes into that, and how you have to literally not just make it fit your foot, but then it has to look good on your foot as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the functionality of that piece of equipment essentially is a contributor and a component of the overall look of ballet and the lines that you create. You can have shoes that are the right strength and flex for you essentially, but if your metatarsals are like spilling over the sides, it's going to break your line. And that's like the end goal with ballet, is like your lines and the aesthetic and like what you can communicate to the audience through the overall look. So this is one component of ballet, and I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, that feels kind of mercurial, like just this craft of the specialist shoemakers that make these custom point shoes that you then have to further customize in order to use them, and they have to fit so perfectly and precisely, all for the aesthetic.
Truly, yeah, because if it was just about the function of it, then it would be so much less work. And I think that's one of the big things with ballet that is maybe underappreciated, is how much has to go in for anything. There's no quick fix. There's no workaround, really. There's like, if you're like, well, this is what I need to achieve, well, you have to go all the way there. You can't just kind of shortcut your way there, whether it's in the technique or in like the costuming, the hair and the makeup. It's like, you can't do, especially like in a ballet performance, you can't just do like a half of a face, really. Like you're talking full beat, full color, everything on point, so that you can translate the meaning and the feeling throughout the entire audience.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, when you were talking about your dance background, and that like big question, the like, so are you going to take ballet? Are you going to like do that? It's so interesting. And I heard this growing up all the time, because I primarily took ballet classes. I also took like jazz and character classes, which I feel like is so obscure nowadays, but I took them. I actually really loved character classes, but I had all kinds of dance experience, but primarily ballet. But that's something I heard, especially from people who came from other styles to ballet classes, is like this foundational technique helps everything else because it is so much about strength and precision and discipline that it will enrich every other type of dance that you do. And I don't know really where I started with that, but that what you were saying reminded me of like how integral ballet is even to other branches of dance too.
You were talking about Mercury and then you transitioned into that. But yes,
Yes.
I agree with you because there's even, especially for like an example for like me and other dancers who are really into hip hop or Latin fusion, they look at ballet and they think, what would that do for me? Like, why would that help me at all? And they don't understand how much grace and how much elegance and how much your posture changes entirely, even if you're doing a hip hop number, even if you are doing something that is very hard hitting, there are still ways of doing it that require more or less effort. And one thing that has always struck me about ballet is that you literally work harder to make it look easier. Like,
yes,
when you watch ballerinas, it looks effortless, and that's like the Venusian of it. And then I guess like just like going into it, that's like the Saturnian part of it. That's very how hard did you have to work to make it look easy?
absolutely. The whole perception that it should seem effortless and really weightless takes so much fucking work. It takes so much work. And even I'm thinking back, I know kind of what I was following off of now that left my brain, which is like you can't cut corners in ballet. And like if you can learn how to develop the discipline to not cut corners through ballet, it will help you not cut corners everywhere else, and it will enrich everything else through that. Like you have to go all the way. It takes so much commitment. And yeah, part of my ballet training that, when I've shared this with people like my partner, for example, who has absolutely no knowledge or background of ballet, I've told him before like some stories about my training where like you're not allowed to like breathe hard and make like workout sounds at the bar. Like you're not allowed to do that in class. You're not allowed to stand with your hands on your hips because it might look like you had attitude. Like you have to maintain this etiquette. You are trained from the very beginning, even when you're not performing yet, to make everything look effortless, and everything is very controlled. But it kind of has to be, even in a studio setting, for that end result to really translate and for it to look real, and not so you don't see the strain of control in your body or on your face. And it's wild. It's totally wild.
Yeah, God forbid you think you should sit down.
Oh, that's like the cardinal sin. Did you see my face? I was like, I had like the fear of like 12-year-old me. Yeah,
God forbid.
Down in class, no sitting down in class, no yawning in class. My training was so intense at some point that we weren't allowed to adjust our leotards. If we didn't have a leotard that fit well enough, we were to get a different leotard. So we would have no adjustments in class, which is that's like maybe just a little above how strict a normal ballet class would be, but that's where your girl's coming from here. So
this is where I should say that moving forward, there is certainly a trigger warning about sensitive content incoming and upcoming. Probably should have said it at the top, but everything thus far has been pretty fine. But certainly going forward, we are going to be touching on very sensitive things relating to talking about the body, that if you are not in a space to listen to that now, then feel free to take a pause and come back to this whenever you feel ready for that, because it is impossible to talk about ballet without talking about some of that difficult stuff, which especially in like that, how like adjusting a leotard, like for anybody that has any sort of like sensitivity or insecurity, like you're going to be fidgeting with your stuff. Like leotards are tight, tights are tight. They're called tights. And they're going to be a little itchy and irritable until you get used to them and get comfortable in that. And it's that comfort within the discomfort, because along with so many of those insecurities are like, does my hair, even if you're in class, exactly how that training starts early, is like, is my hair okay? Like, is my leotard okay? How does my body look in this? Which is a whole can of worms.
Yes, it sure is. It sure is. This reminds me that, so for those of those of you listening that aren't familiar with like what a ballet class is like, it takes place in a studio where at least one wall is all mirrors. So you can see your body, so you can see your technique, so you can see the way the teacher gives you corrections, so you can adjust your body and continue to kind of optimize and perfect your technique. Venusian as fuck, first of all, to be like, I'm going to spend most of my time in front of a wall of mirrors.
Literally.
Yeah. And then also like that comes with its own challenges. Like I can see a lot of my own kind of persistent issues with body image being reflected, pun intended, oh my God, with the fact that I did grow up learning to scan my body so I could self-correct for the sake of my technique. But it kind of blessed and cursed me with this massive body awareness that I just don't know that every young person had, just because not every young person spends so much of their time examining themselves in a mirror and watching themselves do things. So that's an interesting, like Venusian and challenging aspect of ballet training too.
Very much so. You learn so much about yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror and you have conversations with yourself in a mirror. And that's actually a really good thing to mention up. I completely forgot to put this in the outline, how the Venusian and the Mercurial come together, because when you're in a dance studio and there's a mirror in front of you, y'all are talking to each other through the mirror. You are not going to turn to each other and have a conversation. You're gonna be like, I'm looking at your eyeballs through the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that if you are not in the dance world can seem weird as fuck. Like weird as fuck. I remember a partner that I had once, we were like in the bathroom essentially after having sex. And we were like, I was like trying to talk to them through the mirror and they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, we're
why
talking.
aren't you looking at me?
I was like, I am looking at you in the mirror. But it's such a weird concept to think that you're all at the same time doing that thing where you're like, I'm looking at myself. I am analyzing myself. I am making sure that everything is good. While also on the inside, of course, wanting to feel like you look good.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had never thought about that. That's such a just like inherent part of my experience that I had never like isolated it to think about it before, but you're so right. Like you're constantly putting yourself kind of in the perspective of an audience, like you're your own audience all the time by having that mirror there. And yeah, you 100% just talk to people through the mirror. Like yeah, that's wild. My mind's kind of blown just thinking about that.
It's so real. And people that aren't used to it, it throws them completely off of the loop because it's something that we have. And it's one of those things in the dance world, as many things are, where it's not told to you. It's not explained to you. You absorb it by osmosis and by watching people do it. And so you just do it. And there's not necessarily a conversation that happens where you say, this is what we're doing. It's just known that you're doing that. And then through that way, you're obviously able to like see your own corrections and things better through those conversations through the mirror. It's wild to think about.
Yeah. There are so many Mercury Venus connections in ballet. And I remember obviously when I first started getting into astrology, I looked at my chart and I was like, okay, what made me specifically so into ballet? And I feel like having Mercury and Venus conjunct in Virgo is definitely one of them for me. I'm not saying like you have to have Mercury Venus connections or find them in every example of a dancer's chart. But yeah, I'm sure as we go, we'll talk more and more about those connections, but it's so real. It's so Venusian and so mercurial.
It really is. Okay. So I'm gonna go into a very sensitive area of the body, because although we can think that the moon is classically the body, Venus still has so much to do with it. And a lot of that ballet struggle is feeling that you have to maintain a certain physical appearance to do ballet, and not just to do it, but to be respected in ballet is to have a certain aesthetic. And for those who don't know, that is generally a very stick thin person. Ballerinas are often some of the smallest, most petite people that you're seeing, because often if they're professionals, they are getting lifted up, and dance itself is a lot of fucking cardio. So you're not able to really gain or keep much muscle mass because you are dancing so much all the time. You are moving so much, along with the sort of broader, almost unspoken expectation that to do well in ballet, you are going to have to be smaller. And I know for me personally, that was a big thing that I struggled with because I was a kid that was not naturally petite. I was not like naturally very small. It was very easy for me to like gain and maintain muscle mass. It really always has been. And so I was never like the skinny girl in class. Like I was never, especially because I'm a little taller too. So I was never the smallest one. Like I would lift others. I would not be lifted. And that says it all right there. And so that sort of expectation that you are going to maintain the way that you look is very painfully Venusian, that you must maintain this beautiful aesthetic that you have. But as soon as you don't have it, then you're not going to be as marketable, and you're not going to be able to be in every role. And that can really do some damage on the psyche and on the ego.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like this is where we get a little bit of crossover between the Venusian and the Saturnian with ballet, because of the discipline and control it can take, and just the sense of control and constriction around your body having to look a certain way, your aesthetic having to be very specific. It's really one way we can see a union between Venus and Saturn for sure. And I love that I'm seeing more conversations around body shaming in particular in the ballet world right now, more than there ever has been before, because it is a very unspoken thing.
It
This
seems
also
taboo.
100%, because it's just like, this is a slightly tangential planetary reference, but ballet is so competitive and it feels very martial in that way. And I was never a person who was just naturally really, really slim and slender. Like my body when I was training, like absolutely did not fit the like kind of waif-like, sylph-like, classical prima ballerina type of look at all. And then, here's a kind of more specific content warning specifically about disordered eating and eating disorders and body image stuff around that. By the time I was 14 and 15, I was absolutely constricting what I ate to try to be smaller, even though I was already small, because the market is so saturated. I remember going to auditions in January and February of every single year for summer intensives and seeing hundreds of girls that had way more technique than I did, better bodies than I did, just different anatomically than I was in ways that I couldn't really control. And then I found that sort of this disordered eating was one thing that I could control. So almost even if your teachers are not pressuring you about your weight or your body composition, it's really, really difficult to not be affected anyway, simply because anything that gives you an edge is typically something you seek out, or at least that's how it was when I was growing up and dancing. Because, if there are 100 girls in an audition and 2 are getting into the summer intensive, you have to use everything you have, whether it's something you have naturally or inherently or something that you worked hard for technique wise. So it's such a slippery kind of subject.
I think even what you were saying about like how you use the word like things that give you an edge. I was thinking about this. This is maybe like a mercurial tangent about how in ballet, often we use descriptors that are more triggering than people realize. Like, oh, like soften your hand. But then when it's someone's body per se, you don't want it to be overly soft. And how the double standard of that is so real in ways that don't even seem obvious through just like communicating and through instructing even.
Yeah, absolutely. My brain is like opening up the archive of like things I've heard from teachers, corrections I've heard, and like ways of describing people that I've heard that are really to communicate the feeling the art is supposed to communicate. So on one hand, I'm like, yeah, obviously. And then on the other hand, I'm like, you can't say that to a 12-year-old. Like, what are you doing? But yeah, it does seem like there is so much more awareness around around these topics in ballet today. I've seen professional dancers speak out about these things in like massively huge, like top 3 in the world ballet companies. And I'm so glad to hear those conversations
I
because it's a
agree.
huge issue and it's dangerous.
It is very dangerous because you have one strict ballet teacher that says one off the cuff comment to the kid, and that's literally the next 10 years of their life. They potentially have an eating disorder, and not just an eating disorder, but an extremely low sense of confidence. They don't look at themselves in a positive light. Like when you talk to yourself in your head, that goes from being really positive to being really negative. I know that for me, this is something that recently I have been working through a lot more intentionally, although it's something I know I've been working on maybe subconsciously for a while, which is my inner dialogue and my own like monologue that I have and the way that I speak to myself in my head. Because exactly like some of those corrections and some of those things that teachers have said, like those ring true, even if you're not consciously remembering them in a teacher's voice, you then remember the sentiment and then you start to say it to yourself. And even if it wasn't meant that way, things can be misconstrued so easily that you can then really start the wheels turning and you're snowballing. And then you're just like the avalanche is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it occurred to me there's this other side of this topic as well, which is there are people who are naturally really slender, who have trouble keeping on weight, who feel like there is finally kind of like a place for their body to fit really naturally in something like ballet, where there are they have these beautiful lines and whatnot, where maybe they were teased otherwise for having like, stick arms or being very gangly or what have you. And folks who genuinely fuel their bodies really, really well, but naturally stay really small. And there's so much stigma around eating disorders and ballet in general that it's important that we try to rein in our assumptions around one thing or another. Just because someone is small and is a ballet dancer or a dancer of any kind doesn't necessarily mean that they have an eating disorder or what have you, because dance is so demanding, like so much cardio. It is, I've joked with friends before that like a variations class where you run a very short, very specific piece from a ballet, it's essentially like high intensity interval training. Like that's what it is. And the muscle that you build and retain, although body mass tends to be lower for women especially, you are putting in work, like you are burning the calories. Like there's a lot to it. It's a very complicated kind of topic overall.
Yeah. And especially how people often look at dancers and they're like, okay, you dance, that's what you do. But dancers cross train by doing so many other things. So they do so many different types of conditioning that contribute to that. And like, I can almost guarantee you that like any professional ballet dancer that you see, they are doing a lot of other things in addition to just ballet, because they want to, if you just do ballet, then you're not properly cross training everything that then makes you better at doing ballet. And there's so many things that go into that I feel like people don't see because of course they don't know. But when you're actually in the background, you're understanding, it's like, oh my gosh. And especially how you're saying people that do like fuel their bodies well, because that is a very real thing with dancers that just burn so many calories that they don't know how much. That's something that I definitely see, I think more in kids than adults, because adults have more of an awareness about it. But kids will just be dancing and dancing and dancing and dancing. And then it's like, have you had dinner? Did you eat lunch? I'm like, I'm not hungry. It's like, oh, you will be. You will be. And even if you don't feel it, you need to know to fuel your body and to know that you need that nourishment so that you can keep going and keep going so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember cross training for sure. Like probably by the time I was 12 or 13, I was doing weekly Pilates sessions where I would then do like Pilates things at home to strengthen my core. And part of that too is injury prevention. Like because it's don't even get me started on the ways in which my body is fucked up from doing ballet. It's really pretty bonkers.
We're gonna go there.
We're gonna go there. I'm so excited. Yeah, but that's a huge thing, especially when you're dancing in a professional capacity, is cross training for injury prevention and just to hone your craft from a different angle. Like it's so very athletic. It's so very athletic.
That is definitely one of the ways that I think people underestimate how martial ballet really is, because it is a sport. And I think this is interesting. So anyone who doesn't know how like dance competitions work, it's literally like a full weekend. You wake up, you are ready to perform on stage, full makeup at 7 a.m. I cannot imagine anyone else in any other profession ever being mentally well enough to have full hair and makeup done, ready to go on stage at 7 a.m. You're warmed up, you're done, your costume's on, you're done, you're ready. And so in that aspect, like you are managing so many things, and it is really a sport. And interestingly, I've had conversations with people at the climbing gym, like talking about teaching dance, and they've been like, oh, dance isn't really a sport. And I'm like, you have just exposed that you know nothing, actually. Hate to break it to you, but I would love to educate you right now. And so it takes so many different muscle groups all working together in a way that like your entire body awareness is on a whole other level. Like you're not just doing like a bicep curl where you're working one muscle group, you're focusing just on that. You are extending and strengthening and using flexibility and holding those lines in ways that requires your entire body to be taught, controlled, focused, that requires so much athleticism.
Absolutely. And the ways that the kinds of corrections you receive, you're essentially doing like a very Virgo operation in a ballet class or in ballet training or rehearsing for some kind of show. You are isolating very small muscles, support muscles, tweaking tiny little details that do impact the overall performance or the end product. But it takes so much mental acuity also, not just proprioception and body control and body awareness, but like mental acuity to understand how to apply a correction and put it into practice consistently every single day. So much goes into it. And it's like, it's physically so taxing and mentally so demanding as well. Like there's so much that goes into it. And there's this is a really mean joke that I heard growing up, but it's like, you know, dancers can only count to 8, which is of course implying that dancers aren't very smart, which is ridiculous. And besides, I'm an astrologer, I can count all the way to 12. But anyways, that aside, dancers are some of the smartest people that I know. You have to be so mentally on to do what is asked of you in a dance context.
Not just to like make corrections, but like memorizing choreography. And then when you're practicing the choreography, you receive a correction that you are expected to immediately implement while also remembering all of the other steps that you still have to do the same way that you've remembered them, but you have to remember the change as well as the things that are the same. And yet maybe there will be a correction that comes as the choreography keeps going. And it's so many steps to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And then remember, it has to look natural and effortless.
It has to look beautiful. It has to be easy.
And you have to receive it with like really, really good class etiquette too. And it's just, it's wild. I can't tell you the number of times it would be theater week. So 1 week before a show weekend in the company, and the director or choreographer would be like, yeah, this isn't looking right on stage, and would change the choreography days before the show. You have no choice but to integrate it. Like you have no choice. Like you go home after work that day when you leave the theater or the studio, and you have the music and you listen to it in earbuds and you rehearse it in your head and you visualize. Because again, like, what are you going to do? Just, oops, I forgot. Like, it's not an option. So there's so much Mercury in ballet,
And especially going off of what you said, that really leans into the Saturn as well, of like, you have to respect your teacher.
Yes.
You have to respect your teacher. You have to bow to your teacher at the end of every fucking class.
Yeah.
Don't forget. And there is such I don't want to use the word hierarchy, but there's such like a chain of command in ballet, especially in companies where you have like multiple levels of ballet dancers at like they do different things, different levels. And there is so much respect, and how you were saying etiquette that goes into that, of making sure that you maintain your poise and maintain your stature, and all of those things. I guess we're like really diving into Saturn now, because it's happening. We're being permeated by Saturn at this point.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're so right. That etiquette is so strong. And there is usually a really hierarchical structure for ballet companies. There are like the principal dancers at the very top that dance most of the lead roles. There are soloists, there are demi-soloists, and then there's the corps de ballet, which is I don't want to say like filler dancers, but when there are a ton of dancers on stage, that's the core to ballet. And like they're really there to support the leading cast. And there's so much there about unison also, which feels a little Saturnian. But one thing that I remember from my most intense training that felt very Saturnian in a different way was a sense that I belonged to a lineage. And you can feel the way this technique has developed and been passed down as a tradition. When you're in a ballet class and you are not only being taught ballet steps, but you're being taught what they mean, where they came from. And I always really liked things like that. Like, I think that's part of why traditional astrology was so like magnetized me so much, because you could feel how old it was. And there was so much, I was so fortunate to have the teachers that I did who had so much respect for this tradition as a tradition. And I felt like it was my job to be a responsible representative of that tradition by the way I presented myself and showed up for class as a dancer and as a person, which feels very Saturnian. Like this thing has deep roots. All the way back to the French and Italian courts when King Louis was popping off. But yeah, that's something I had a strong sense of when I was probably too young and should have been having more just fun. I was like, oh yes, the deep lineage.
It's so real though, because you
Yeah.
are in a sense bigger, a part of something that is much bigger than you,
Yes.
and that has been much bigger than you since the inception of it. And that it was always this thing that was, whether the myth about King Louis's calves are real or not, it has always been a thing that is bigger than one person. And that is how you were saying, in a ballet company, there's so many different levels, there's so many different people that contribute to this, because one person cannot do it alone.
Absolutely.
One person does not make a ballet. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
And so it requires all of these people working together, all of them doing different things. And also, great time to mention how many like ballets are still happening. Like the Nutcracker, for example, that thing is old as fuck.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that thing is so old. The ballets that are still so widely known and are still continually being reproduced time and time and time again, they have stood the test of time, literally. Like
Absolutely.
they're classic for a reason. They're not going out of style for a reason, because they have Saturnian staying power that can't be touched, because it has been so well respected and so well cemented in the art, in the tradition, that it is there and it exists, period. Like literal period, end of discussion. Like no one in their right mind would ever say, why are we still doing the Nutcracker?
Right. Or like Giselle or like Swan Lake. It's like, these are timeless.
Don Quixote.
Like right. Like they represent something so essentially balletic. Like these are really these classic ballets that capture what this art form really is. And it's like, they're not going out of style. I feel like I've seen several companies that are doing Giselle recently. So then me being me, I went and found Giselle streaming somewhere and watched it. Loved every moment of it. But yeah, it's so true, that timeless quality.
Something that I put in our outline that I want to make sure that I say is that whenever we were talking about this and thinking about this, and especially that like Venus Saturn spectrum, something that really struck me is that when you think about Venus words, Venus embodied, that really defines how ballet looks. That's how it appears. But then when you think about Saturn words, Saturn embodied, that's how ballet feels as a person doing it. And that often means it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, for sure. Saturn provides the infrastructure you need to do this intensive training and commit to it for so long, as well as like do a production as big as one of the huge classical ballets like Giselle or Swan Lake, where it is, it takes a really strong infrastructure to pull off a production that huge. And there are other much more complicated productions too, but that's such a good simple way to put it. Venus is like how ballet looks, and Saturn is how it feels, like the foundation under it or behind it.
Yeah, for sure. And something else that you were saying with the time, that's such a Saturn thing, because like technique does not just appear. You can't conjure it, you can't summon it. much as we would love to, you have to put in the time. There's no way around it. And also, like, it takes so much time to build it up, but then if you don't continue to rehearse and work that technique, then over time it will wither. It's something that you have to continue to put in the effort. You have to be very disciplined and like consistent with it for it to remain, which is something that anybody who has done ballet and then taken a break can really appreciate.
Yes, that's very true. I don't know how many people are aware of this either, but typically once you get really serious about ballet training, and or if you're in a company, you're dancing 6 days a week. You get 1 day off if you choose to take 1 day off, typically. Every single day, whether you are rehearsing or not, which you usually are, like rehearsing for a performance, you will be simply taking a ballet class. It's usually first thing in the morning. You do the exercises you've done since you were 8 years old because you're constantly honing them every single day. And when I was dancing professionally, taking 2 days off was a huge deal. I was like, that's a lot. I don't know how my body's going to feel when I'm like back at the bar on Tuesday morning after 2 days off. And I mean, if you were taking a week off, God forbid, 2 weeks off, the technique is so specific, and it takes that diligence and the time that you've put in, that taking time off, you absolutely lose it, if you don't use it. And, not least because you're doing really unnatural things with your body, like you're rotating your legs externally, the flexibility that it takes, the strength that it takes. You don't use those muscle groups necessarily, just like walking around and being a person. So yeah, that in and of itself is so Saturnian. This is an everyday dedication to your craft, full stop. And I often compare it to like martial artists doing forms or something like that. Like there's that almost meditative aspect to taking ballet class as often as we do.
Specifically with what you said about the exercises we've been doing since we've been 8, because if you have taken long form ballet classes, you start to memorize the combinations, because every single ballet teacher has favorite combinations that they will continue to throw at you. And oftentimes they have those favorite combinations because those combinations are diverse. They cover a lot of different movements. They cover the foundations and they hit all of the notes in one. I know for me, that is something that my ballet babies actually were kind of like getting frustrated with me a couple months ago, because they were like, Miss Mackenzie, we're doing the same stuff at the bar. And I was like, yeah, but we're doing it a little faster and we're adding stuff to it. And also, do you not recognize how much you've grown at doing this one specific thing? It could be literally a tendu. For those who don't know, a tendu is just when you point your foot out. Point. Mm-hmm. But something so simple as just that can transform over a couple months, doing the exact same motion over and over and over. And so you get all of these things, like these baseline combinations, even like ballet teachers taking like little pieces of variations from ballets, and they work those and like train those as a training tool. You get comfortable doing them, and it does become meditative. You become so comfortable doing these things that are very uncomfortable that you can do them on autopilot almost, because your body is used to them and they know them. And you're like, okay, we're doing that one tendu combination with the plie and the thing. Okay, got it. Cool. And then everybody's on the same page because you've all been doing it for the last 6 months, multiple days a week. And so that sort of training cannot be replaced. It can't just be materialized. It takes the time to do that so that you can think, okay, yes, I'm thinking about this. Yes, I'm like working on this stuff, but I'm like not having to like think about it in the way that is like overthinking almost, because that does happen a lot in ballet classes where you're thinking so hard that you think yourself out of the movement.
Yeah, I was definitely one of those students, an overthinky student. No one is surprised. But there's such an interesting thing that happens, especially the more advanced you get with ballet, when, you do return to the bar every morning, you're doing familiar combinations and familiar movements, but there is always room to improve. There is always room to do the movements in a cleaner way, in a more precise way. And there is a point where you no longer are giving yourself the same correction kind of verbally in your head that your teacher gave you yesterday. Like you might when you are a teenager, or when you're first starting ballet, you're not like, oh, I need to make sure that I point my toes harder when I do this. It becomes something that your body knows. So there's this interesting mind body thing that happens that feels almost like a Zen state, where you're not giving yourself like mental cues necessarily to do these corrections and work this optimization of your technique. It's just happening physically. And like when you stop and think about the amount of time and effort and being in that place where you do have to receive the correction again and tell yourself verbally again and focus on it in isolation, moving from that to this kind of like synthesis of mind and body, it's like that's when you're really using your body as an instrument. That's when your body becomes the medium for art itself, which is what I love about ballet. And there is no way to get there overnight or in a week or in a year. This is why ballet is so all consuming so often. It almost has to be to reach a point like that, where you can be in sort of a Zen state.
It takes so much time, so much
Yes.
practice for it to just be natural, because as we've been saying, like the Venus Saturn of it all, it's like the work that goes into making that natural. You can't just like manufacture that. You have to put in a time. There's no way around it. And I know, I've put my chart up in like the first episode, but for me, my Saturn is fallen. And so I have had a very viscerally unhappy experience with that a lot of the times, not thinking that I deserve to have technique overnight, but just feeling so frustrated with the answers that I was being given about why does it take so long? Because it does. Okay,
It just does.
well, can I have more than that? Like me looking for not necessarily a workaround, but looking for more explanation, because for me, that just wasn't, as a fallen Saturn, simply being told you have to put in the time, that wasn't enough of an explanation for me. Like I needed more. I needed to understand. I needed to feel it in my own body. And that was very difficult to overcome, because it's like, I don't want a cheat sheet. I just want more answers, because I don't like the answers that you're giving me. And definitely worth mentioning here, since we've been talking about Venus and Saturn, Saturn has their place of exaltation in Libra. And so when a planet's exalted, those who don't know, exaltation is like, honestly, better than domicile. Like when a planet's like, to me, when a planet's in domicile, cool, you can make a mess, but you have to clean it up. But when a planet's in exaltation, you're like, they're going to clean up my mess. Like I'm good. Like I'm at their house. I'm at their house. They're taking care of me. They're going to clean up my mess. And Saturn exalts in Libra. One of the reasons for me is because there is something beautiful within structure. There is something that is gorgeous about this container and this structure being what it is unapologetically, and not having to explain it away or become something else. It is what it is. And that tradition of so much time being put into this thing, that's enough. That is what makes it beautiful.
That is such a good point about Saturn and Libra, like Saturn providing that structure, that infrastructure, and that's so necessary for that much beauty to be possible. I think about it also in a more purely astrological sense of like the etiquette and rules we have between ourselves and relationships socially is part of how how harmony becomes possible and how right relationship is possible. So we can see how a planet like Saturn would do so well in Venus's sign. And I feel like ballet is such a good example of that. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's really perfect.
It's definitely been something I have struggled with a lot, especially, so for some context, I have only been the like regular ballet teacher at the studio where I teach for like this season. Before now, I helped substitute, and one of my best friends was a ballet teacher. She also, like Joe, was very ballet specialized, was a ballerina in a company and things like that. And she moved away. And so then I was essentially the next person with as much or the most ballet experience. And I have put myself through the ringer this year, training myself harder than I ever have, being harder on myself than I ever have in a ballet context, because I am now in this position where I understand how important it is for a kid in a ballet class to have a good role model. because a lot of my ballet role models were, a little strict, and the ballet archetype role model is very, very strict. And that's not to say that I'm not a strict teacher, but that's just to say that there doesn't have to be one mold that everyone fits in. And the empathy and the kindness that can go along with the very difficult enforcing of the rules that you have to do as a ballet teacher. And I know for me, that's been very, very healing as a Saturn and Aries person to now be on the other side of the very Saturnian line of this boundary of like, I am no longer a student, I am a teacher. I am now on the other side of this boundary. I have crossed it. And now looking back at the other side and having the perspective that I do and the experience that I do to say, I can form my classes and shape my classes in a way that is going to be very formative and very healing and very empowering to my students, as opposed to maybe tearing them down. And I know that I'm a Saturn and Aries teacher. I'm not a Saturn and Libra teacher. And so I do use some funky music sometimes, pretty much every single song that I use in ballet is like a modern song that is like a classical version of it. Because for me, that is one of the ways that I know how to stay true to my Saturn as a teacher and know that I will get bored with using the Sugar Plum Fairy. Okay. My students will not like it because then they will tell that I don't like it. So they're not going to like it. And so if I can have like a fun version of like Bad Guy and that can be our Tondu song, then the kids are so much more into it, because they are being given a much funkier perspective than potentially they would. And so I know that that's been essentially that exaltation and fall relationship of Saturn has been very, very powerful for me to explore and understand, as someone who has to toe both lines, because I understand that the Saturn and Libra perspective is still there. It's still important. And that is one of the foundational things in ballet, is that perspective and that time and that beauty and all of the things that go into that, while also understanding that it's like 2023 and the Sugar Plum Fairy sometimes ain't fucking it. And the kids these days do need a little bit more to stay invested. And I don't want to say that like, I don't want to be all kids these days, but in a time when we're so like, because when you and I were taking ballet, like, I'm sure that there was like technology and stuff, of course, but not as much as now. And it wasn't so ingrained in us, it wasn't so fundamental to our psyche. And so now having just a different world that we're existing in and raising ballet dancers in, and kind of touching on how you were saying like the discussions about body shaming and body image that have now become much more widespread in like big companies, people openly talking about these things in ways that like they could never have done before. And it's really pushing the art in a way that it's not disrupting the tradition, but it's continuing to let it evolve and let it grow in a way that can still honor the tradition as it is, while also understanding that we live in a different time now. I'm probably really on my Saturn and Aries soapbox right now. It's probably super obvious.
No, we love it. You're so right, though. There's a way to still honor the tradition of ballet, but still bring it into a modern context and make it wildly more inclusive than it has been in the past, because it has been very exclusive in many, many ways. And that's something that I see changing a lot too, that I think is really, really important. And I think your perspective is really unique, being a ballet teacher and having Saturn and Aries. As you were sharing all of that, I couldn't help but think about how I just have plain old Saturn in domicile. I'm like, yeah, I just have the Sun Saturn opposition between Leo and Aquarius. And I was absolutely the student that was like, oh, these are the rules. Got it. I'll do it perfectly. Like, but I also have Venus and Virgo. Like, these aren't very spicy placements. They're very like, yes, I understand. I understand the assignment. I will get an A++. But I will say that I taught ballet briefly at a local studio, and I also pulled out the like different music. And this I feel like is what made me a really mercurial teacher. I was like, okay, if you want to improve turns, you have to understand that turns are about rhythm. You can't just spin, it's about rhythm. So what did I do? I brought in this like weird 8-bit like EDM style music, And my girls improved on turns so much because that driving beat, like echoing through like a ballet studio kind of space with like those kind of acoustics, it got the rhythm in their bodies. Like it connected them to this tradition in a different way, to the technique of it. And I loved teaching ballet because there are so many tangled knots when it comes to explaining something in a way where it will click for your students, to where they can embody this technique, no matter where they're coming from, because every single dancer is different and all their gifts are different. And I could talk about teaching ballet for literally 3 hours straight. So I'll leave it there. But I loved your Saturn and Aries perspective on ballet and teaching.
Appreciate that. It definitely is a struggle sometimes, especially for anyone who hasn't like seen my chart. I'm a Sag rising, and so all of that Saturn and Aries is in my 5th house, like literally of children. And so and so I, interestingly enough, I took kind of a break teaching kids and focused on teaching adults for a very long time. And when the studio asked me to be their regular like weekly ballet teacher, there was a part of me that was like, Saturn lessons, because I've been in Saturn perfection years. I'm finishing up my 2nd of 2. I'm in the Aquarius year right now for like 2 more, or I guess a month and a half left, a little bit. But it's been very much like Saturn lesson on Saturn lesson on Saturn lesson, just preparing for my upcoming Saturn return, and just knowing that this teaching children thing is very much ingrained in who I am, and that I, at this point, very likely will always teach children dance in some form or capacity, because and that's not to say that I don't love teaching adults, because I do, but there is something that and I know that this is because I want to reiterate that I had wonderful teachers growing up, but I also understand that I could have used more role models, like all of us could as children. We could always use more role models with different perspectives to show us different things about the world. And that I am in a very unique position, just as who I am, like the chart that I have, to provide perspective to kids about ballet in a way that is not gonna be the same as they're gonna get from a classic teacher. And a Saturn and domicile teacher. But we need them too. We need all of them.
Yes. So true.
So let's let's pull up. Oh, actually, I did want to mention, so talking about Saturn being exalted in Libra, I also just wanted to briefly mention the fact that the moon exalts in Taurus. And I want to mention that Venus is the only planet where both of her domiciles has a planet that is exalted there. And that there is something so powerful about that reminds me of the power of ballet in a way, because I'm sure you probably know this feeling when you are watching a ballet, or you're experiencing a ballet, or you're in a ballet, and there's people around you that are speaking a language that you know is not yours, that you don't understand it, but that the movement transcends everything, that something within the dance itself is the tool of communicating. And maybe that's the Venus Mercury of it there, but it is the tool that you have to speak with people and to express yourself, and how that form of expression is so fundamental. Like when people are like, it's fundamental, what? Yeah, it's ballet. It's ballet that is fundamental, actually. And how easily that allows people to connect with each other. And especially ballets that most of them do evoke a lot of emotion, and they tell a story, they make you feel something.
Yes.
And that feeling is, spoiler alert, feelings are the most powerful thing that there ever are or will be. And that ability to really touch someone that you never met in an audience, that you'll never know, that you'll never meet them, and to do something for them and to make them feel something that is so powerful and unlike anything else that they've ever experienced, that is so magical.
Yeah, it's so true. And this, I feel, is such a like Venus Mercury coming together thing. The ways in which art across the board is really communicative, and it's a medium for expression and communication. And ballet is one of these things. And I've often thought about my life since I quit dancing, which I didn't mention this part of my story, but I quit ballet really young. Even for the average length of a ballet career, which is
young.
short. I know people are like 26 and they're like, dude, I'm getting old, but truly your body can only last so long when you're doing something like ballet, hence injury prevention, different topic. But I quit ballet really young. I quit when I was 18. And the story I told everyone about that for a long time was that I got injured, because it's a very common story. But the true story was that some combination of how demanding it was on my body and my psyche and my environment and just other things going on in my family life and personal life, I had gotten really gripped by an eating disorder, and my parents were very concerned about me. They were trying everything they could to support me and help me, but I'm a stubborn bitch. And eventually they pulled me out of ballet. And I didn't tell anybody about this. I just kind of pretended it was fine and moved on, which didn't really allow me to grieve that major turning point in my life at that point. I since have done a lot of grieving and a lot of healing around it. And so I'm in a much better place now to just kind of lift the vibe back up. But some things that I have thought over the years are like, there is this whole language that I have access to that lives in my body and in my muscle memory, and I have nowhere to put it. But the main reason I bring this up is because it really does feel like a language. There's the specificity of the steps, the way we learn how to do them, the way we link them together, that it feels so communicative, especially in something like a choreographic process, where it is your job to use the tools available, the steps available, the language available to you to say something to an audience without verbal words. And I just think that's a really incredible process. And I think dance overall, and, you know, ballet specifically for our purposes today, is just one of the best things in this world for its ability to do that and to connect with so many people beyond words.
That's so much. It's so true. And especially, I guess the other side of the coin is like that side of the coin, like you are conveying all these things without words. And then the other side of it is, if you ever hear a ballet teacher talk through steps, it's fucking gibberish. Like, it is literal gibberish. Like, y'all should listen to some of the voice notes that I text Joe, and I'm like, yeah, parasha, si, son, si, ton. And I'm just like, this sounds psycho to anybody else who doesn't understand it. But then when you're listening, you're like, okay, step, I'm following, I'm visualizing. Because when you're listening and you're hearing steps, it's like you're picturing them, visualizing them in your head, while also processing, understanding the language and like what's being said and how to interpret that and then put that into your body. It's so many steps from like the intake of the words to then the production of the movement. But yet that time is actually like not at all when you're in class and you're like, this thing, do that, and then transition into this, put the arm there. And it's just all so flowy when it happens that way.
Yeah, it becomes so immediate, which is wild, because I'm thinking about like being in class or being in rehearsal, where basically like the ballet master or the director or whoever is essentially shouting counts and maybe an adjective here or there. It's like 1 and 2 and sharp, sharp down, like all this, like, what are you talking about? Like, this would sound absolutely insane to anybody, especially if somewhere in the process there's like some kind of analogy that's used and it's taken out of context, but one word from it, like one verb or adjective, is taken and then used for that step every time as they're shouting it. It's just
like water.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, and waterfall. And it's like, what? That's not the name of a step. That's just part of what happens in this communication.
That's the vibe.
That's what you're supposed to evoke in the audience. So yes.
That reminds me of a couple different things. Okay, so one that reminds me of the really funny like dance reels that you see people post of, you're like, your contemporary teacher that's just like, I want more pigeon, okay? I want a little more bird-like. And then the opposite of, or like, I guess not opposite, but like another token of that is the reels that you see where someone's like, give me a ga, e. And you're like, okay, I got it, exactly.
Yeah. And they're like, you know what I mean? But your dancer brain is like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I know exactly what you're asking me to do. Yeah.
Right. Like, I have understood, the assignment was understood just by those words alone. Even if those words are actual gibberish and it's just like noises, phonetics, it's it evokes that emotion, that feeling, the vibe that you're trying to get across.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And that's the kind of feedback that dancers are taking in real time as they are dancing to integrate in real time. And it's just, I'm in awe of dancers everywhere because it seems bananas from the outside, for sure. I think you're muted.
Oh, there we go. I forgot to unmute. Thank you. But I want to loop back to something that you put in the outline at the very bottom, talking about Mars and specifically muscles, because dancers have, and a lot of times, especially like if they're visually more like smaller or petite, like how ballet dancers are often seen smaller, you underestimate how big their muscles are.
Oh, 100,000%. And it's not just calves, baby. It's the ass, it's dancer ass, it's dancer legs. I was so spoiled just being surrounded by dancer legs growing up, and just like aesthetically, just because dancers have the best legs and asses. It's true.
Especially ballet dancers.
Oh yes. Because that much control, so much of what supports the steps you do is going to be your core and like your legs and your glutes. So you naturally, just by virtue of doing ballet and training it, you develop so much muscle in those areas. So it is not uncommon. I did have a six-pack when I was a ballet dancer, and it's not because of the Pilates I was doing necessarily. It was because you had to have a strong core to hold the center of all the other like flowing movements that you did around that center. But yeah, the muscle on these people, listen, back muscles. We're climbers too. So we're all about that, like, give me that jacked back, baby. And like dancer backs are like a whole thing also.
It's so true. Especially that's something I've learned when like instructing kids with their arms, because kids and like people that don't know ballet, they think it's just your arms. They think your arms are doing all the lifting. It's all your arms, but it's all coming from your back and your chest, really opening up and like keeping your posture tall. And
I'm like doing it. I'm like, yes, I'm like pulling in my core. I'm sliding my shoulder blades down my back. Like,
if you're watching the video version of this, you're getting a gift. I just want you to know the video version of this pod is going to be a gift, y'all.
Yeah. And I even like, have the like, I'm giving like Giselle right now with my
you were, and then I came through with the whole bun. I was like, we're giving. Oh, especially with what you were saying about like specifically glute muscles, because for those who don't know, when you turn out in ballet, a lot of people think you're just turning out your feet. Oh God, no. You are turning out from your hips themselves. And so literally what you're doing, opening up your hips, you're essentially squeezing your butt underneath itself. And so that is like the squeeze point of like your butt, hips, low, and like into your core, into your back, that literally gives you that foundation, like you were saying. But it's so booty intensive. People look at ballet and they're like, oh, calves, feet. And it's like ass.
It's all ass. It's all ass because like you're rotating the femur in the hip socket. The muscles that do that are literally the gluteus medius and maximus, your ass cheeks. Like you, and then from there you have to use every part of your abdominals, the transverse, the obliques, and the rectus abdominis, all of that to support your pelvis, which your glutes are like attached to in different places.
Through these little sockets.
Yes, everything goes back to how those joints rotate in the sockets. And yeah, it's the feet get all the attention, the beautiful hands get all the attention, but it's about the ass. It's true.
It really is. Honestly, that's like the short version. That's like the too long didn't read version of this pod. It's just ass, actually.
Like I think I put a bullet point in the outline that just says muscles, and then under that is like, have you seen dancer's ass?
Yes.
Like that's the tweet.
Honestly, it is. And because it is so real, especially because people like dancers are seen as such small people often, like ballerinas are seen as like these ethereal, like waif-like creatures. And it's like, have you seen their dump truck though?
Have you seen them in just the leotard and tights rehearsing? Because
the tutu covers
be disappointed. That's yes.
The tutu covers a lot.
You're asking the important questions right now. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, let's spend a little time looking at some dancers charts. So unfortunately, we don't have times for a lot of these charts. Some of them we don't even have days. This is Joe's chart. I guess I might as well pull up my chart again for reference. I guess I showed it earlier, or I guess I showed it in a different episode. But speaking of Venus and Mercury, my Venus and Mercury answer to each other, which is not surprising at all. And then here's my little baby fallen Saturn. Bless their heart. Bless their heart. Bless their heart.
Doing great. Really,
they're doing great. So actually, let's start with Misty, because you mentioned earlier how short a ballet dancer's career usually is. And I think Misty is such an iconic example of the opposite in so many ways. And also worth mentioning, I have put all of these charts at noon because none of these have times, which is disappointing, but that it be that way sometimes.
Yeah. Misty is actually one of those dancers who, she's an absolutely incredible ballet dancer. She's a principal dancer with the American Ballet Theater. And she started ballet, I believe, when she was 11 or 12. She was a very late starter, which makes her basically all that she has accomplished even more remarkable.
Yeah,
truly. But yeah, go on, Mackenzie. I want to hear what you have to say.
She is an anomaly in so many ways, because one, she started late. How you said, like, she didn't start at like age 2 or 3, and she has continued to do this for so fucking long, to the point where at many different points in time, I've seen like news reports, people coming out like talking shit, being like, isn't Misty gonna retire? And it's like, step back.
Why
would I retire when I am still fantastic? When I am still amazing? Why would I retire when I have literally just begun to peak? That's like how I feel anytime I see her performer videos that she posts and stuff. And like, you just keep getting better and better and better. And no surprise that Misty herself has Saturn in Libra, like the fine wine of time herself. And also worth mentioning that Misty Copeland is a Black woman. She has made history getting roles as a Black woman in ballet that have not had, like, just point blank hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Because it has been so French and Italian, it has been very European. And so ballet has been seen as this like white girl's game, when it's not. It absolutely is not, does not have to be. And Misty Copeland has shattered barriers in so many ways, which I think is so pronounced for a Saturn in Libra. Like, yeah, here's your tradition. I'm going to follow it. In fact, I'm going to follow it better than damn near anybody else. And I'm also going to shatter every expectation that you have about it in the process, in a way that you have no option other than to have the utmost respect for me. And I can't help but give it up for that.
Yeah, 100%. Misty's dancing really speaks for itself, but everything else she has done for this intersection of communities is absolutely huge. It's absolutely huge. And I can't help but notice not only Saturn in Libra, but ruled by a fallen Venus, subverting expectations, like absolutely shattering these ways of doing things and saying like, no, I'm doing the Venusian differently and you won't be able to look away. And we have this beautiful mutual reception, not technically, but like, it's enough for me.
It's enough for me. As someone who has like Venus and Mercury answering to each other in averse signs, I'm like, I don't give a fuck if they can't see each other. It's reception. Like, it's
still reception. Yeah. So we have this like Mercury Venus connection too. I know we talked so much about the Mercury Venus connection in ballet, with Saturn tied in, and Can we talk about Mars?
Can we talk about Mars?
Can we talk about this domiciled Mars?
You knew I was going to go there, because Misty also has one of the things that people have seen and known about her very long is that she is visibly fucking strong. Like, she's
so
not
well-muscled.
She is not a wafer thin ballerina by any means. Homegirl is juicy, muscular.
Yes.
And that is something, especially for me as someone who grew up as a dancer with more obvious muscle tone, with like not a small body. Seeing her and looking at her as one of my role models was so earth-shattering, to think, oh my God, someone of that size who looks like her in all of the different, identities in different ways that she looks different than a ballerina, is like, wow, that's someone who is doing so well at something and is undeniably a boss. And that martial energy of like no one being able to tell her anything otherwise is so strong and like so visibly strong. I just like love watching her dance, not just because she is so beautiful and graceful, but because she looks fucking strong. And for me, that was something that was very empowering about dance and about ballet specifically, was it made me feel strong.
Yes, absolutely. To everything you said. Misty Copeland has been the role model and the representation that so many people have needed on so many different levels and so many different ways, just from her muscular and juicy physique that is often not a thing. It's like, oh, well, how can you like wear a tutu when you have a juicy ass like that? Misty's like, oh, you do it like this, and she crushed all of it. And being a Black woman, being cast in these roles that have been historically for white women only. um I can't say enough good things about Misty Copeland, whether it's her dancing or what she's done for the community, or about her chart, her beautiful chart, honestly.
Truly, like especially like down to the whole like moon in Gemini
Mercury
answering to
ruled, yes.
yeah, all of it. She's such a good example. I love her chart. Okay, so let's go to a chart that we literally don't have a date for. So I don't know how in a world you can be so famous as Anna Pavlova is, and still to this day, there is a question over what day you were born. Like I was looking at it, like some people said February 11th, 12th, 10th, 13th. I was just like losing my brains. Because I'm like, how can you not know the time? Okay, whatever. It was 1881. Maybe you don't know the time, but we don't even know the date. So this one we have to take with a grain of salt. Although the only thing that realistically would have changed is like the rising and the moon, because everything else is in like middle of the sign, wouldn't have like a too big of a gap. But that is very interesting. And I know for me personally, I swing on the edge if I think her moon would be in Cancer or Leo personally. But that's
There's a thought that I was having as you pulled this chart up was, what if the moon's in Cancer opposing this Mars? Because that's a really strong exalted Mars. That would be a really strong moon. And I feel like that speaks to like the resilience of body that you need to like endure ballet training. Of just like you need to be able to handle it physically and emotionally, putting yourself through that much martial work. So yeah, grain of salt, but it'd be pretty cool if she had a moon Mars opposition.
I was kind of thinking that she did for sure as well, because especially just everything that she's done and how iconic she was. So for those who don't know, Anna Pavlova was a Russian ballet dancer who, a legend. Like, what do you even say?
There are like point shoes named after this person. Like I remember getting fitted for first point shoes and people are like, oh, did you get the Pavlovas? Because they're like an iconic like first point shoe. Yeah.
It's very hard to deny the influence of her, and like over time, over centuries, literally at this point. And so I was also leaning the same way as you. Whenever I saw her chart, I was like, maybe she could have been born on the 11th when the moon was in Cancer. But definitely have to talk about her Aries situation. Like the double debilitated Saturn, Venus, and Aries. I pulled up her chart for the first time. I was like, my brethren, like in my Saturn generation, well, not technically when I was born, but like my Saturn, I guess, placement, and feeling, especially this Venus here, and how this is also a little triggery, but Russia's cutthroat. Like they took hold of ballet and they went extreme with it. Like, and I know that people have heard a lot about like Russian gymnasts, like rhythmic gymnastics and artistic gymnastics, and how hard they are on those athletes. And like ballet is just another side of the same coin of that, and how far they push them literally to the point of breaking themselves. And how that's essentially normalized in all of these ways, and how like this very like cardinal like T square right here would like, with, if we're hypothesizing the moon in Cancer, which I think we could probably safely say it is, that is so loud to the experience of that.
Well, and not only that, but all those Aries planets ruled by an exalted Mars in Capricorn, and that's actually a Jupiter, or not Jupiter, Saturn Mars mutual reception. So it's like everything disposits back to a Mars Saturn square between Aries and Capricorn. Like Anna Pavlova was a legendary performer, and also like imagine what she went through to be that. I feel like this is like the secret of like the beauty of ballet is like this shit is what's underneath kind of thing.
Truly, like her chart like gives very much like the underbelly vibes. Like whereas you look at Missy Copeland's and you're like, this is fire, and then you look at Anna Pavlova's and you're like, oh my god, everything was on fire actually.
Literally.
Especially how you were talking about like this mutual reception here, like the staying power that her name and her legacy has had speaks to the power of an exalted Mars. The way that you are truly able to fight for what you are going to do and then literally pave the way for what's going to come next in the tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love her chart. Even though it's literally what day she was born.
Questionable.
Whatever the fuck.
We can speculate.
We can speculate.
We can
especially
speculate as a treat.
Especially for a treat, especially because I'm just such a rectification nerd and I love doing it with clients, that when I pulled up her chart and I was like, we don't know the day, and I was like, let's go.
Yeah.
So let's look at Mikhail Baryshnikov's chart. So again, untimed, we're going with noon for this one. Also would be super bitchin' if this was his chart, because this was functionally the like rising first house situation when we started recording today, which was super cool. So I'll let you go ahead. You go ahead and pop off about this one, about him, because you probably know more about him than me. Although I kind of want to hear your perspective.
So Baryshnikov is a legendary dancer, just virtuoso. He went on to be in movies, and I believe he was even in Sex and the City. So people who aren't even super familiar with ballet or don't have any kind of special interest have usually heard of Baryshnikov. And it was because he was not only like an excellent dancer technically, like he really brought the best out of his partners when he did pas de deux with other dancers.
I definitely think I actually put the incorrect information in for some reason. The actual
this is 2023.
Yeah, I was like, wait a second, this was the chart when we started today, because it didn't actually calculate. That's so typical. That is so
that's good, because I was like kind of barely looking at it because I'm just thinking about his chronology a little bit. But yeah, basically he became super famous because of the technician he was, the performer he was, and how much emotion he was able to convey in his performances, and just how banger of a dancer he was. Like if you find old videos of him, like he looks like he's flying when he jumps, not only because he's jumping really fucking high, but because his whole heart goes into his dance. So he became very famous. That's the short version. So I love to see these Leo planets, because it feels like putting a lot of heart into what you do.
Truly, especially because something that for me, like whenever I started really like learning about him and knowing about him, is that it wasn't even that he was a dancer that was really emphasized as much for me learning. It was more that he was like a choreographer and a director, and that he was able to like conduct and shape these performances that really gave them this like otherworldly, out of this world appearance and feeling to them. That even it took me actually some time to like go back and be like, wait, he actually was a dancer too, which makes sense. Like most ballet choreographers were dancers at one point. That's pretty expected. For sure. But the fact that, at least from, I don't want to say an outsider's perspective, but I wasn't trained like in a ballet company, but almost from like a peripheral perspective, I'll say, like not outsiders, but more of a peripheral perspective, that his iconic works that he's created and helped direct have almost had more of an impact than what he did as a performer in so many ways, which I think is very, very interesting.
It feels very like Sun Saturn too, because like we have this interesting mutual reception between the Sun and Saturn here. The moon is involved, Mercury's involved, but it really feels like it speaks to like leadership and legacy, not just performance. So yeah,
This is
Part
big
of-
legacy vibes.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Can we
Especially,
just
go ahead.
I was gonna say, can we just talk about the like oppositions going on in this chart? We have like the Leo Aquarius opposition stuff. We have the Venus Mars opposition. We have like a Jupiter Uranus opposition. Um, Mercury, Saturn, and the Moon are in this T square with the nodal axis. Like there is like this could be a whole project. This could be a
Honestly.
whole like rectification and otherwise project. There is a lot here.
Truly, to have so many planets at the bendings like that, it's
Mhm.
so loud. The way that he has shaped ballet and like, especially because some of these planets are like so not vibing, like they're so not loving it, you know, like the moon and Saturn are like, we are literally in like the place that we don't want to be. Thank you. Looking at the person that we don't want to be looking at. Like, very seriously feeling a bit of that tension, that push and pull, especially you feel with the opposition as a sign itself, or as a aspect itself, feeling that push and that pull. And I can imagine that that's something that was really big for him, was that push and pull between like, do I want to continue dancing? Do I want to pursue choreography and directing? Like, do I want, like, what part of that do I play? And then him, as a result, having such an impact in all of those ways. Literally.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just thinking about how he has like these really, really strong benefics too. And like, fortunately, there's some aversion going on in certain places, like between the Leo and Virgo and all of that. But we have this like Jupiter that's contacting the Leo and Aquarius planets. And, I could go like really hard into all the more technical stuff, but yeah, such a fascinating chart for a really impactful individual.
Definitely. The last one that I wanted to look at was actually not a ballet dancer's, but he is so iconic, and he actually has a rough estimate time, but it's like C or D rated or something. And so I was like, I'll just like, oh, why did you do that? I hate it when they do that. But I think the estimated time is like 6:30 or 6:35, which is like fresh Scorpio rising. I think it was 6:35 it was estimated. Yeah. But yeah, so for those who don't know, this is one of the most famous composers of all fucking time. Literally wrote some of the most iconic ballet music that is still to this day used. It like his impact, and I don't want to go so far as to say ballet wouldn't be ballet without him, but it would look fucking different in today's world. Like, it's been at this point, just a little less than 200 years since this man was born, and yet he has had such an, like, you can't even overstate the impact that his music has had. Because if there's nothing else that you remember from a ballet, even if you don't remember the steps, if you don't remember exactly what happens, you remember the feeling. And the feeling is both contributed to by the dancers and the music itself, and the way that the dancers move to the music, the way that it all goes together. And so to have such potent, amazing music, like, it's massive.
Yeah, it is. A teacher of mine, and probably a lot of teachers said this, but a teacher of mine growing up always said the music is your master. Like, everything, like ballet is about technique, it is about discipline and all of those things, but like it has to be musical. Otherwise it will not carry that emotion. So I'm thinking too of how many choreographers will work together with composers to create original works where it's like the music and the dance are like being created together and for each other, and how powerful that is. But yeah, Tchaikovsky, what can you even say? I was literally listening to Tchaikovsky this morning before we started recording.
Same. Yeah, like it, especially if you were a ballet dancer, you probably listened to Tchaikovsky for fun. Like, we're talking Nutcracker, we're talking Swan Lake, we're talking like a version of like Romeo and Juliet, I think. Like, we're talking the major ones, the huge ones that he composed, that his music, it wasn't just music, it was literally like, this music was a service to the people. Like, he put in the time and the effort and did that for us all. And I think that I really love his Saturn and Sag for that specifically, because his music has been able to transcend time and space in such a way that you quite literally hear his work, like the lineage and tradition of his work, you hear it and you are instantly transported somewhere. Like you just hopped on that Sagittarian magic carpet ride and you're like, I am now in a different place, a different space, a different environment entirely, simply because of the tune and the notes that you just put on that have thus transported me, which is so powerful.
It is so powerful. And, obviously in a musician's chart, I'm immediately going to be like, ooh, what's Venus doing? And I love that we have Venus and Mars in this mutual reception in this chart. I think it's also interesting that Mars is combust. I wish we had a for sure birth time, because I love what combustion does as far as like rulers of the houses, but that's a little bit beside the point. But yeah, and then we have Mercury and Venus really close here too. And this is just kind of echoing back to the whole art as communicative in general. And so many ballets wouldn't be what they were without his compositions and the stories that they told, and the way that ballet was able to add a visual element to the story that the music itself told. Just like a film score helps tell the story of a movie. Same thing with ballet. And yeah, Tchaikovsky is just so prolific. This is really cool. I'm really glad you pulled this up, because I had not looked at this.
It's very interesting that like mutual reception, because of course, like we know, any traditional astrologer knows that if Venus and Mars are in mutual reception, then they are in their places of exile or antithesis or inversion, whatever detriment thing, whatever thing you want to call opposite of domicile, not the argument for today. And so that and also interestingly, it's a C rated. I think I looked up, it's C rated. But if you take it a little bit earlier, then that's Libra rising. And so regardless of if it's Libra or Scorpio rising, you're ruled by a planet in the 7th house opposite of its domicile, which I think, honestly, even the rectification is another bit entirely, but whether it's Libra or Scorpio rising, that is still true, which I think is very, very interesting about him, about his works, and about how they have really transformed the ballet world. Like, yeah, I can't even imagine what the ballet world would look like today if we didn't have like the Nutcracker and Swan Lake. Like it's almost unfathomable, truly.
Yeah, there's such cornerstones like in the tradition itself. So yeah, for sure.
It's just hard to fathom how it would even look or how it would feel.
Yeah, truly.
All right, I'm gonna pop that down. So I guess, oh my gosh, we've talked about so many things. How do you even like start to conclude right now? How do you even start to like wrap up and touch or conclude and summarize everything that we've just said? But I guess, do you have any thoughts about, just like finishing thoughts about ballet, I guess, specifically for people who don't have experience in ballet, or people that maybe don't have or haven't had exposure, that maybe like this long form introduction has been the introduction to them?
I think, from my very biased perception, I love ballet. I think there's a lot to appreciate there, even just as like a viewer. Just being able to appreciate not only what you're seeing, but a little bit more of what goes into it, and how it is an art and a craft with such a long tradition that can be so expressive. I think ballet is touted as really stiff a lot of the time, and I can see that for sure. But it's sometimes kind of an acquired taste. But once you get a little bit more accustomed, like there is just so much beauty there, so much storytelling. And you all know storytelling is my whole thing. Aside from ballet and astrology, like story is the most important thing to me in my life. But yeah, I hope if you didn't have any kind of familiarity with ballet, that our super long form nerding out introduction maybe piqued your interest, and you can go find some streaming services or whatever to maybe check out one of the classics or something more contemporary.
Something that you said really struck me was like people see ballet as being really stiff. It's like people get stuck on the Saturn and they don't quite get to the Venus or the Mercury or any of like the juicy stuff behind it. They get kind of like stuck with the Saturn like stiffness almost, which does make sense, especially how strong and how much you have to control your skeleton literally to do the things that you're doing. And people can almost get stuck on that and not like see how much beauty is truly there and how much is there to appreciate and enjoy and just really experience as art itself.
Yeah. And, I think ballet, when kind of a layperson thinks of ballet, they probably imagine like the pancake tutu, like the flat tutu, or like the really long ones that go down to the floor and they're white and you're having like the thing and the crown. I did just do this one.
That is it.
Giselle. Yes. They think of that, the very old, very traditional, very formal ballet. But especially now, especially if you have like a local ballet company in your community, like go see one of their shows where they're doing more contemporary works and contemporary ballet. You will not have purely a traditional, very formal feeling experience. Like you're going to see art that is new, that's being produced by choreographers today, that still preserves the tradition and the steps and the history, but brings it into a modern context that will feel a lot more fresh than what you might think of as like dusty old formal ballet from the fucking French court. So ballet has a ton to offer, and there's a lot of variety in what you can see too. It's not just white tutus, I promise.
It is not just white tutus, and especially some of those like new, especially I think of like in the Nutcracker, like the Arabian and like some of the cool like funkier variations where they have like not a tutu on, they have like a cool like costume and stuff, and you see them come out and you're like, oh, that's ballet? And it's like, yeah, that's ballet too.
Yeah, and one documentary that I really like is called Ballet 422. It's about Justin Peck, who is a corps de ballet dancer with the New York City Ballet. And he also is a choreographer. And it's this documentary that goes through the process of like creating and choreographing a ballet, the rehearsal process, the costume design process. And it's really well filmed. It's a really cool watch, but that gives you insight into what ballet is like behind the scenes, like really up close and nitty gritty. And also Justin Peck's choreography is very contemporary. He does a lot of pieces where the dancers are in like tennis shoes and things like that. So there's just so much there. And that's something you could actually go find and watch on some kind of streaming service. If you're like, this seems cool, but like, I don't even know what to Google. Ballet 422 is a good one. So
if you are interested in more entertaining context, you could look at the Gargate saga that happened, that Joe and I were absolutely living through. So a few months ago, it all started very, very, innocently with a ballet dancer going around to everyone in their company being like, so what's your least favorite ballet step? And this step called the Gargliade was by far and away everyone's least favorite ballet step because it's really fucking hard.
It's fucking hard.
And if
you do it wrong, it just looks stupid. Like it's so hard.
It's one of those steps where it like involves a lot of things. And if you do it even the slightest bit wrong, you literally just look like you're flailing around. Mm-hmm. And so it requires a lot of precision. And so that then evolved into a very beautiful saga between the American Ballet Theater and oh my God.
What was the company?
Was it Royal?
It wasn't Royal Ballet.
No.
Because the guy flew to Amsterdam, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember. It's that American Ballet Theater is the company that did this, though. You can probably still find it in their reels.
You can. But it's there.
Yeah, it's
definitely worth it because that is also something that you see in the ballet world, which is everybody has a least favorite step. Everyone has a least favorite step. Everyone has a favorite step. And every dancer has a thing that they're like, I have to work harder at that to get better at that. And so that gives you a nice little fun perspective on what company life is like.
Yes, for sure. Speaking of, what is your favorite thing to do in a ballet class, Mackenzie? And your least favorite?
Ooh, hot take. Ooh, okay. Damn.
Doesn't have to be step. It can just be like.
So I was about to say, I was thinking step, but I have always really liked bar. I don't know. I always did like bar, not just for like the bar being like a safety net, but because I really enjoyed combinations where you would do something on one side and then immediately turn and do it on the other side at the bar. Like, And that's probably me being very Gemini and being like, oh my God, I have to do everything on both sides. But I always have loved doing like essentially like bar reversal work. And also when you're doing combinations. Oh, okay. Something that I have always really liked. When you're in ballet class, you'll have like sections at the bar, sections in the center, sections across the floor. One thing that I always loved was doing jump combinations where you would start from one corner and essentially go across the room. And then someone else would start while you're going across. And then it turns into this like weaving thing. And then like, I always fucking love that. No matter what the jump was, no matter what the combination was, that feeling, like even if you're just in ballet class, like practicing technique, it feels like you're on stage when you're like, and I'm going this way and I'm leaping and then someone's going the other way and we're leaping at the same time. And it feels so theatrical that even though you're just practicing, you can be in technique class. You're like, we just did that. Yeah, we did that. So I've always loved that. I've always hated frappes. I have always hated frappes. So frappes, for don't know, frappe means to strike. So you are literally like striking the floor, which also if you do it wrong, you literally look like you're like glitching when you do it. Like
terrible step. Like it's very necessary. And there's a reason we have it. It's so you can do like other small jumps in the center with better technique, but
yeah,
God, is it annoying.
But I always hated frappes. Yeah. And to be fair, someone in the ABT one, a couple people did say that their least favorite was frappes. So when I saw that, I was like, I'm validated. Thank you.
For sure.
What about you, Joe?
Okay, I also love bar for the meditative aspect. But in general, I hate adagio. I was never an adagio person. So adagio would be like very slow, like languid movements that really show off a dancer's flexibility and balance. And like I was
like
flexible.
Think lots of like developing the leg, holding.
Where your leg goes up into the fucking sky.
Yes. Both of us are like the leg.
We're like the leg. That frame doesn't even show it, but we're like, we're marking it with our hands, what our feet are gonna do. Yeah. How to spot a ballet dancer in the wild. But yeah, I hated, my balance was not bad, but my flexibility was just not my strength. And I also just didn't like the style of it. I was like, this is just not what looks best with the instrument that I have. But I loved jumping. With as much humility as possible, like I could jump really fucking high. Like it was absolutely my strength. So like the big jumps, like the ones you described across the floor, that like awakened a memory of doing that where one person goes across and then when you're going back the other way, the other person begins. And then it feels very much like a performance. I loved everything having to do with that. Frequently when I was dancing in the company, we would do combinations in small groups across the floor. And I would go back to the end of the line and go at the end with the boys because I wanted to see if I could jump as high as them, which was like a very tall order because,
ballet boys got hops.
They absolutely do. But I would like try to compete with the boys for jumps. And I begged my director to let me perform a men's role in the Nutcracker once, and he like wouldn't do it. But I was like, please let me do Russian. Like, please let me do Russian. Because I'd be perfect for it, right?
Perfect for
And he
Russian.
was like, no, you're doing Spanish. But anyway, so I always loved jumps. Adagio was not for me. And I honestly hated point work too. I didn't like the delicate movements. Like I wanted like robust and strong movements and very like sweeping movements rather than the little delicate,
very delicate
point work precision. I just was like, I'm good on that.
Yeah, all of the little pickups and all of the little coupe pickup, step pickup, step pickup, step pickup.
Beret forever. I just, would rather do literally anything else. So yeah, those are my favorites and least favorites.
I feel that. Funny enough, I'm working on, so my studio's recital is like a couple months away, 2 months at this point, and I'm working on choreographing like my ballet pieces. And I texted Joe a couple days ago because I put this very small, like petite allegro. So petite, small, allegro is essentially, you can think of like the opposite of adagio. So like fast, quick jumps and stuff. I put this like very, very short, but very difficult petite allegro section in like the middle of their dance. And I taught it to them and they were both like, okay, this is really hard. This is really fun though. But yeah, this is really hard. And they were like, you sure you want to put this here? And I was like, yeah, it's going right here. It's going at this spot in the dance because that's where the music fits. It's perfect. And they're like, wow, this is really fun. But also, this is like the hardest part of the dance. I was like, yep, because especially when you're doing jumps like that, you like big jump, but then you have to use deep plie to like settle into it before the next jump. And so it's like that bigness is so fun. It's so dramatic.
Yeah. Imagine the double Leo being like, I like the big dramatic jumps. Like,
I like the big jumps, baby. Yes.
Yeah. Give me
big
those
air.
Big jumps, baby.
Especially with Jupiter in the first, you're like, I want big air.
I'm like, how can I jump even higher? Even higher.
That's amazing. Yeah. I don't know how I didn't know up until this moment that we were both more leapers than the slow. I didn't know. I feel like I knew that intrinsically in my soul, but we hadn't exactly discussed it. So I love that just came out.
No, I love that too. And like, I was a decent turner, but I was not like the turning person too. Like, turns are all right, but like I much preferred jumps.
Yeah, so. Same. I was like, I would work more on my turns than my jumps because I was definitely not a turner per se. Whereas like jumps, it's like, yeah, cool. That's cake. Just,
I can do that all day.
Yeah,
like,
I could jump all day for you, but ask me to turn all day. Whoo.
There will be a point where I'm like, I'm actually not doing this anymore.
I'm actually empty on the inside now.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. So plug yourself, Joe. What do you have going on? Is there anything that you're working on right now? What do you offer to the people? Where can people find out more about you? And is there anything like specifically that you're really excited about right now that you're doing?
Okay, so I am open for booking. I open for booking once a month. I'm about to close my April books and then they'll open at the end of April for May. But I offer natal consultations, timing consultations, and I offer a special 12th house reading as well called Waymaking to the 12th house. So you can find out more about all of those readings and kind of more about me in general on joemakerofways.com. And Joe Maker of Ways is where you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as well. I am also on Patreon. So if you would like to support me being able to do the research I do and the readings and the writing that I do largely for free, you can essentially buy me a cheap coffee every month by supporting me on Patreon. There are a bunch of different tiers and it's less of a content mill and more of like a true patronage type of thing. So you're not going to get your email clogged with like posts from me every single day by supporting me. It's just a way to kind of show your love and keep me encouraged and resourced. So those are my main projects right now that I have going on. There are some things kind of brewing, but I don't want to say too much too soon, but keep an eye on socials and on Patreon for that.
Yes, I personally cannot recommend sitting with Joe in consultation enough. I fell in love with Joe during my own waymaking consultation whenever I discovered that we both have these little 12th house watery moons. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so seen. I'm so seen. And then really we just fell in love from there. So True. It just happens. And so I personally cannot recommend Joe highly enough as someone who is very well versed in the tradition. As we all know, Joe is good at that, but also has a very humanistic and vulnerable approach that you don't always get from traditional astrology, and something, especially in your narrative storytelling approach, that is so relatable to real everyday human incarnate life, that is very, very beautiful. And so get on Joe's books, okay?
Oh my God. Thank you for the kind words. It means a lot, friend.
Of course. So we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for listening to this extremely deep dive on ballet. We both knew that this was going to be a long one. We had no pretense that we're like, this is going to go for a hot minute. Like, and I even knew asking Joe to do this, I was like, this is probably not going to be like a 45-minute conversation, dog. So be well nourished and well hydrated for this one, because we're going to go in, because when you love something so much, you can't help but want to do it the full justice, which in many ways I think speaks to ballet itself and the tradition and how long it has existed, and how once you take a ballet class, it doesn't matter if you take one, you are now a part of the lineage and you are now a part of this ever-growing art form. And that is so beautiful. And whenever you both love it so much, you can't help but want to do the most justice to it that you can.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right. So we're going to call it for now. Thank you so much for listening. I know it was not short. If you watched the video version, honestly, you got a gift. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being funky. I will see you next time our fates weave together.